Look, he's talking to them in the way he thinks he needs to talk to them.
Why can't you acknowledge that?
Because
that is something that no president
I don't take orders from you, number one, and number two, I give him the space to negotiate with you.
Far-right MAGA creep Scott Jennings was back on Abby Phillips' show to act like the smug prick that he is, to hurl insults, to spread misinformation and disinformation. We're going to take a look at clips of this heated panel debate on Abby Phillips' show. I want to share my thoughts as well. Let's get into it together.
Tonight, a question about American values after President Trump warned that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. He has since delayed that threat now for 2 weeks, but it still sent shockwaves all over the world, including the Vatican.
Today, as we all know, there was also this threat against all the people of Iran. This is truly unacceptable. There are certainly issues of international law here, but much more. It's a moral issue, for the good of the people entirely.
The Pope has been weighing in on this conflict for a while now, but I think you described it as a genocidal threat. Other people have described it that way. I mean, there's this debate always, should you take Trump literally or seriously? But whether you take him literally or seriously, saying that you're going to end a civilization is a serious threat that no American president has ever issued before.
And you shouldn't. And honestly, those sorts of things just really are very unhelpful. But I will also say we're not unaccustomed to him doing this. He did it with respect to North Korea. He said similar things with respect to China. He's made bluffs with respect to Canada. He's done it over and over again. And every time that he does this, I find that the media is running around chasing its tail with respect to him. I get he's the president of the United States. He should not be saying any of that sort of thing. And it's wrong. It is absolutely wrong. At the same time, how many times are we going to do this with this guy? I mean, why? I mean, why are we engaging?
You can blame the media, but it's also
so the onus is on us to say, oh, well, we'll just ignore him because he's making statements like a mad king. So we just normalize it as, well, that's just Trump being Trump and move on. Is this someone that you would tell your kids that you should look up to this guy and believe what he says, with the president of the United States, or just, well, you can go around and say whatever you want and threaten to, annihilate civilizations and just, it's the media chasing its tail every time he says something like that.
In fact, I've said exactly the opposite to my kids. I have said exactly the opposite.
I'm glad.
Yes,
so why is the standard different for the president of the United States? You wouldn't let your kids get away with something like that.
Because it's happened over and over and over again. Yes, and he wasn't. He is the president of the United States.
So isn't it the media's job to hold him accountable for it?
You have to actually deal with what you have. Right. And what we're dealing right now is with a president that, again, I take the view, and I know it's a minority view, what he has done with respect to Iran has been good for society. It's been good for the world. Hamas has been degraded. Hezbollah has been degraded. The Iranian military, the nuclear, it is an evil nation state. I look at the long game rather than a bunch of talking heads.
We're not, like I said, we're doing the service to Mad Kings. Mad Kings haven't said things like that since going back to Genghis Khan. True. This is not even unprecedented in modern times. It was unprecedented even in medieval times to say things like this. And what a president says matters. It's not enough to say, well, that's just Trump, and let's not chase our tails around this. When we have politicians at this table. When politicians speak, what they say, the way they say it matters and ought to matter. When I was a child and came home and if I used a profanity, my parents then saying that's just Bobby being Bobby and we should go on with that. I got my punishment for that. And the president should not get a free pass. He's an 80-year-old man. He's a grown adult. He cannot be just simply brushed. This kind of behavior, this kind of language cannot simply be brushed away. A civilization, for crying out loud. We're not even allowed to say that about a town or a village. We're not supposed to use language like that. George Bush went to Iraq and he used very different language. The language, I covered that war. And it was not a war I was in support of, but I covered it as a journalist in Baghdad for 5 years. I distinctly remember George Bush saying, we come to Iraq with respect for your civilization, with respect for the faiths that are practiced here. There's a difference. Presidential language goes down in history.
Agreed.
And that's got to count for something, and we cannot simply brush this away like this.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't have any respect for the government, for this regime, but I'll tell you, unhinged and unhelpful. That's the only way when you read something like that and you say, how does this advance the ball forward? Mm-hmm. And also, there's only so many times you can cry wolf and say things like that are so extreme and crazy where people just blow you off, including other world leaders, and don't take you seriously. And I think the more this, yes, we're desensitized, you're right, and that's not a good thing. And by the way, a little language, I'm from Jersey, so a little's okay. Let's not get too clean.
I get how old you are.
I mean,
Before we get to the magenta gymnastics from Scott Jennings, I just want to say what a dumb argument from Chris Matt here. Imagine, is there a company in America that would allow an employee to behave the way that Donald Trump behaves and to say the things that Donald Trump behaves? You know, the panelists use the analogy of a child, and no one would let their child behave this way. And when other people complain to say, hey, that's just how he acts. You may not like it, but that's just how he is. We're not going to try to discipline him any. But just think of, would any company allow this if they had employees tweeting the kind of things that Donald Trump says on Truth Social or says publicly in press conferences? No, they would fire that person. If it was a CEO, they would be gone. So why on earth do we allow this? Because the Republicans are scared of Donald Trump, or they just want to go along with whatever Donald Trump does. If Republicans had had any decency at all, not just the first time, I mean, they should have done everything they could to see that Donald Trump was not elected in 2016. But once he was in office, you know, had an entire 4 years, then 4 snorts, more years of being a scumbag and saying things like this every single day. You know, you could just take one thing that Donald Trump says, and any previous person who ran for president or other higher office would have been done. But Donald Trump says a dozen things every day that would take down any other politician. But there's absolutely no way that the Republicans should have allowed Donald Trump to be elected a second to get their nomination a second time. The Republicans should have pulled out all the stops. They should have all gotten together and said, nah, this is an immoral, insane scumbag, and we are not going to allow our party to be taken over by him. But what did they do? They just went along with it. So, they're all complicit in this, and we know what's going to happen in 3 years, or when Donald Trump is no longer in office, or he's no longer around. They are all going to fall all over themselves to claim that they never supported him. This scumbag prick Scott Jennings here in 3 years, if he's still going on Abby Phillips' show, or whatever show, Scott Jennings is going to say, oh, I never supported him. You know, because he's going to be at a 20% approval rating or whatever.
Let me just read this because this is conservative commentator Orrin Cass. He's close to Vice President J.D. Vance. He says, simply put, what is the point of all of this? If these are empty threats that we all know he will not carry out, then they are ineffective threats. The Iranians are on X too, and merely making the president and our nation look foolish. If they're not empty threats, and the president is asserting the American position that such actions are acceptable in this situation and ones that we are willing to take. We are not living in some quantum thought experiment where he is simultaneously is and is not serious.
Mm-hmm. I don't agree that he's made empty threats as it relates to Iran. I don't think
this is literally an empty threat.
I don't think the people that we decapitated at the top of their regime would call them empty threats either. I mean, we've clearly demonstrated the interest in using the U.S. military to take drastic action.
All of the shifting deadlines.
Right.
What do you call the threat this morning to end their civilization, only to accept a 10-point plan that was put on the table yesterday as the basis for negotiations?
You haven't seen the 10-point plan. All we know is that they said they would reopen the strait. Beyond that, we don't know anything.
Hold on a second. The president retweeted the Iranian foreign minister's statement, which said explicitly that they are using the 10-point plan as a basis of negotiation. I'm not making that up. The president reiterated that on an ex post, Scott.
But I have a
so my point is the threats from Trump
and some of the stuff
to bomb their bridges, to bomb their desalination plants, to bomb them out of their civilization off the face of the earth. How are those not empty threats?
Well, it looks like it brought them to the table tonight and got them in a place where they would agree to a ceasefire. I mean, I'll give you a counter argument to all these other positions, which is
that is not connected to reality.
We have a ceasefire.
Tel Aviv is still under attack.
The same table that we have tonight is the table that existed yesterday, in large part. And fundamentally, the only thing that has been agreed to is that Iran will continue to control the Strait of Hormuz and will allow ships to go through on their control. That is the only thing that has been agreed to.
The strait is going to be reopened, and we're going to negotiate about the rest. Beyond that, we don't really know much of anything. But I will tell you, yesterday, Iran was saying, we're cutting off, talks. We're not going to continue the talks. The president uses some extreme language, and all of a sudden, voila, tonight, we have a ceasefire for 2 weeks. Why can't we just say, you know what? Maybe we have achieved military objectives. Maybe we have taken down their military and their ability to export terror. Maybe we have decimated their
haven't.
missiles. Maybe we've buried the nuclear material, and maybe we've got 2
We've
weeks
literally
to
got-
make the world a
Wait,
safer
wait,
place. Why can't we look at this as
why-
a glass half full moment,
Okay.
as opposed to,
But then why?
you know, we have to make
fine.
it
Then-
negative for Donald
but
Trump.
why
That's
can't
all
you
it
just
is.
acknowledge that what Donald Trump said this morning was abhorrent and that no president should ever threaten annihilating a civilization? Why can't you just acknowledge that?
Look, he's talking to them in the way he thinks he needs
Why
to talk
can't
to
you
them.
acknowledge that?
Because I
That
don't-
is something that no
Because I don't
president of the
take
United
orders
States
from
should
you,
say.
number one, and number
I didn't
two,
say,
I give him
I'm
the
asking
space
you a
to
simple
negotiate with the
question.
Iranians
You
the
just
best way he
asked
knows
us,
how.
why
All right,
can't
well,
we
let me
accept
just
this?
ask
I'm
one
asking you
final. Let
why
me
you
ask a
can't
final
accept that.
question, Scott, for the record. Do you think it's acceptable for the president to threaten to annihilate a civilization?
I think it's acceptable for the commander in chief to deal with these people in the best way that he can.
Is that a yes
to
or is
get
it a no?
result.
Is
And
that
I
a
give him
yes
the
or
and I
is
give him
it a
the
no?
latitude to
So
do
that's
it.
a
Is that a
yes.
yes
I'm
or
not
a
going to second
no?
guess him. I'm not going to second guess
So
him.
it's a yes?
He put out a statement. We now have a ceasefire.
Okay.
Those are the two things that
I just wanted to ask for the record.
Yes.
That's a yes on your part.
I would not last long on Abby Phillips' show because if I were Tara Setmayer, I would say go yourself. You little twerp to Scott Jennings, you know. Laughter, I mean. The restraint that people have on I know it's an act and blah 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 all that stuff. But he's still Scott Jennings is such a smug prick. And you know, I don't know if they brought his kids in and held a gun to their head and said, will you say something against Donald Trump? Will you admit that this is what Donald Trump said, and this was bad? I don't think Scott Jennings would do it. You'd be like, well, kids, I love you, but I love the president more. Laughter, you know, I mean. I love that Abby Phillip pins Scott Jennings down here and says, well, that's a yes. But you know, I do these videos all the time because I do think there's something to be gained from the progressive side or the Democrat side or liberal side or whatever the left side, whichever one you want to, whatever you want to call it. But these right-wingers, they bring nothing to the table. It's just propaganda. You know, you think occasionally you would watch one of these videos and be, you know what, and say, you know what, Scott Jennings really has a good, you know, I don't like Scott Jennings. I don't agree with Scott Jennings, but he does have a good point there. You know, I find myself agreeing with Tucker Carlson, who I think is a load-home figure. I find myself agreeing with him a lot lately. I mean, he is speaking out against Trump on certain issues, even though he's sucking up to him in other ways as well and helped to get him elected. But at least on this war, he will say this war is wrong. And in Tucker Carlson has said Donald Trump's comments like these are wrong. So he can at least do that. But Scott Jennings, it's nothing but just licking Trump's boots and every other part of Donald Trump without getting explicit night after night after night. I guess it must pay well. And I'm sure you know, he's wiping his tears away if he has any with $100 bills every night. But I don't know how you could go on TV night after night and say the things that Scott Jennings says. But let me know in the comments what you think. Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. Let me know what you think about this particular debate. If you're on the side of Scott Jennings or you're on the side of Tara Setmayer and Abby Phillip, make sure to subscribe.